Happy 2023, everybody. Welcome in to AWA Unleashed. We are the self-proclaimed #1 podcast and video stream dedicated to telling the stories and the memories of the American Wrestling Association. As you can tell on the screen, my name is Chris Tubbs. As you can also tell on the screen, as I'm going over, we still have not taken down our Christmas and holiday decorations because I let my wife dictate what we do. And when she's ready to take it down, we take it down. But for the time being, it's up. And that's kind of how we do things around my house. Let's check into a couple of other houses here. The house of Karch and the house of Ciupik and Mick, first of his name, and Polish Joe, first of his name. If you're Game of Thrones, I tried to do it and I've already screwed it up. So what a way to start the new year, guys.
There you go. And it can only get worse from here.
I know. Hey, when you start at the bottom, there's only one way to go.
Progress is always in our future.
Yes, it certainly
yeah,
is.
It's true.
Well, happy New Year, guys.
Happy New Year, guys.
Here we go. And Happy New Year to everybody, as Chris said, and we're going to have a great 2023 here on the podcast. We've got some VIP guests that have said they want to appear on the show, so they will. We're not going to let them out of that. And fun stuff. We're going to get you, the viewer, the listener, involved a lot this year directly because we had some great response to our fantasy card contest, and you love the interaction, so we're going to keep that going.
Yep.
Very cool. Let's get right at it. I want to see what these fantasy cards are all about.
All right. Before we get to it, of course, we got some business to attend to. You can see the logo up in the upper right-hand corner. Want to thank Sotastick for everything that they've done over the past year. They jumped on at the very beginning. And I'm so grateful to Landon and everybody because this episode in particular, they really helped make this one go because our listener submitted dream card. We're giving away 3 $50 gift certificates. Now you can get yourself an AWA Unleashed hoodie, the one with the personalized gimmick in the hood. It's great. I mean, they run a little snug, but they're super comfy. I absolutely love mine. I wore the heck out of mine. We've got a black and white AWA Unleashed t-shirt if you want that, or if you want some Minnesota sports, just a novelty t-shirts or, just whatever you want. Sotastick is great. Sotastickco.com. Also, as well, want to thank 7th Avenue Pizza as well. We have 7th Avenue Pizza around my house all the time, guys. Their breakfast pizza, just been out for a couple months. It is just awesome. They've got what they call the meat sauce. Paul Lambert, he works at Station K-Fan. I can say that because, this is an independent project and I can say whatever I want. It's a pepperoni meatball pizza. They've got the Lucky 7, a lot of really great stuff. 7thAvenuePizza.com. And we got other things that are planned, but let's go ahead and get right into it here. We had a lot of submissions, and actually they came to you, Mick. So I'm going to let you kind of set it up here, and then we'll kind of get into the 3 winners. So kind of take us through the process of receiving these submissions and what you saw from everything that came your way.
You know what? It's very interesting, and it was very telling almost right out of the chute what our demographic is. I think when we initially came up with the idea for this, and we said, go back as far as you want in the annals of the AWA, mix and match 1960 all the way to 1990, I think we anticipated a little bit more going back to the 60s, whether it was Tiny Mills and Stan Kowalski, the Kalmikoff brothers, what have you. But it didn't turn out that way. And what happened was there was a lot of crossover. A lot of the matches were late 1970s into the 80s that the people came up with. Matches that, quite frankly, we had seen on occasion or more than on occasion. But there was a lot of repetition, a lot of crossover. So, it defines our demographic. Yeah, we got the old school wrestling fans, and I'm talking about like my era going way back, but certainly predominantly it's the 1970s into the 1980s. So given that, we had a little chore in front of us, and we kind of had to weed out, is this repetition? A lot of it was similar. I think we came up with three really diverse cards for our three winners.
And I mean, what were your thoughts on it, Joe, when Mick kind of submitted everything? Because they went to him, and then he sent us kind of the ones that he thought would kind of fill the criteria the most. When you get that email from him, I mean, what's your reaction to what he's feeding us?
Well, and I replied to you guys right away about it, and I said, let's defer to what Mick said, because quite frankly, what I did see, I thought that they were all great. Yeah, they're different generations and so forth, but we're talking old school. We're talking, I think predominantly the 80s. There were some 70s, not a whole lot of 60s, as Mick had referred to. But they're all great matches. Some we have already seen. Some I had not even thought of myself. And so no matter what it was going to be, it could have been Scrap Iron Gadaski against Big John Studd, which I'm sure happened on TV someplace. But it's still going. I'm still looking forward to talking about the rundown of these matches. Because let's face it, we're talking about the greatest period in professional wrestling history.
And you got to remember that this is all subjective. I mean,
yes, exactly.
One man's treasure is another man's garbage, so there's no right and wrong here by any means. And as Joe said, there were some great entries and people put a lot of thought into them. I mean, some people would send in, they booked the entire card from start to finish. The matches, the moves, the popcorn vendor, and pretty much everything. But we've got some good cards. And Chris, tell them what we're going to do next week. Kind of embarrass ourselves here and try to come up with our own.
Yeah, we are judging you guys this week. Next week, you get to judge us because we are going to put together our dream cards. So we are going to go over these, and this week, next week, you get to do the same thing to us. So not only are you going to get our opinions on what was submitted, but you're going to see what we think, because I think it's only fair, right? Because just because we're doing the podcast, I always get a kick out of people like, oh man, this is, you're so great. It's like, we're just people. So here's a chance for you to absolutely bury us. You can rip our booking all you want. And you know what? That's the joy of it, because I really think our community and our fan base and people that listen, like, there's a give and take. And I feel next week is going to be the ultimate. You can go ahead and give it to us. And I feel like some people don't, honestly, I don't think some people really subject themselves to having that kind of fun. It's like, got to be protective. I'm the expert. I mean, you guys both work for him, and I'm a guy in my, mid to late 40s who wants to learn about it. You know what? Let them come and critique us. I feel like it's only fair.
Well, it would be a shame, a real serious shame, if right after we broadcast our picks, if my email suddenly crashed and I had to, basically ignore everybody's critique, and just give us another 3 gift cards.
Yeah. I got news for you, pal. You're not getting a gift card.
Well, here's what I can say about this week and next week.
Yeah.
And this is a first in professional wrestling history. For the first time ever in consecutive weeks, the one line that is on every single, or should be if it's not, on every single wrestling lineup doesn't need to be there.
That's right.
Card is not subject to change.
Ooh.
Love it.
I figured there was some sort of like, I was waiting for the punchline. I'm like, Where's he going? I'm like, oh, this is serious. Okay.
I would like to point out. Okay, go ahead. Let's.
Let's get to it here. First of all, I'm going to bring up my first one, and let me say this, guys, before we do. A lot of these cards with the crossover, my biggest beef, my one beef that I had, and I told you guys this, was that a lot of these matches we did see, but we saw them later. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because our very first card in our very first match is maybe one of the most famous and iconic matches that has ever taken place in the business, but it took place on a different promotion at a different event. And as I was looking, I'm like, we've seen this before. And with our third card, you're going to say my biggest problem was we saw those matches and we saw them almost at length, but we saw them later on under different circumstances. So that was my only caveat. But again, it's so hard to quantify when eventually there's going to be the crossover somewhere down the line where you have these two. But we're talking about strictly in the AWA. All right, our first submission is from Izzy Presley. And the first match, and you guys are going to know, a singles match for the vacant AWA Heavyweight Championship. Somebody that maybe people feel that the title should have gone on Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant. And we did see this, of course, the biggest one was WrestleMania 3, Pontiac Silverdome in front of like 850,000 people. But sorry, maybe just embellishing a bit. But Hogan versus Andre. And Izzy Presley, this is the first of yours. Congratulations. Hogan versus Andre, vacant AWA title. Go ahead and go, Mick.
I would say two things about Hogan versus Andre. Number one, Izzy's idea was the AWA gets it first. That in his mind, we would have had it in his super card before Vince ever got his hands on it. The other thing is, I think we need to emphasize, and maybe we should have done this more so, put the guys in their prime. If you're putting these cards together, I would assume everybody, no matter who your wrestler is, whether it's Mad Dog, Crusher, you got to envision them in their prime for your fantasy card. And there's Big Andre the Giant. Mm-hmm. And man, can you just imagine he and Hulk Hogan in the AWA back in the day? You know, they wrestled a lot of battle royals together. They did tag team matches together.
Yeah,
that would have been a hell of a coup.
Well, the story that I get from not only Greg, but Vern, was that match, the trajectory for that match was already in the minds of the AWA bookers, and that they were going to do that run. But of course, May of 1984 changed all of that and changed, professional wrestling history, quite frankly, when four of the biggest names in the AWA went to the WWF, and as we know, the rest is history. Fantastic match. If I'm not mistaken, didn't they fight like about 1980 or so against each other? I want to say it was in Chase Stadium or something. The first time that they battled was not at WrestleMania.
Right, and Hogan was not Hogan. I mean, to that extent, he was not the superstar legend.
Sterling Golden, I believe, was his name.
Whatever his name was. All right, what's Izzy's next match? And thanks, Izzy. Great main event.
Yeah. And I will say, the big thing that we hear about, the big match at WrestleMania 3 was that, Andre was battling some serious back issues, and, it was just, he was very limited. So I think that's when we're kind of talking about, being back in the prime. A 6-man tag team match. I love this 6-man. Sheik Adnan LKC with Jerry Blackwell and Ken Patera versus Bobby the Brain Heenan with the Blackjacks.
Oh, that is superb. And, Bobby and Adnan are kind of the third wheels, I think, on each team. So my question is, who does the crowd cheer in that one? I'm guessing that they would cheer Bobby Heenan and the Blackjacks against the Sheiks. And there's Bobby with Jack Lanza and Blackjack Mulligan. What say you, Jody? Would they cheer the Blackjacks and Bobby against the foreign enemy?
Obviously, you can only speculate and guess, but I would say yes. But here's the reason, another reason why I say yes, because I do remember Nick Bockwinkle versus Sheik Adnan El-Kaisi. I think they did a match or two, and Nick was the babyface. He didn't change, but the crowd definitely popped. They did not want Sheik Adnan El-Kaisi. He was the more hated of the two. And so on that premise, I'm going with Heenan and the Blackjacks as a baby faces in that 6-man tag. And I agree with you. That's a hell of a 6-man tag match. Mm-hmm. I love when you don't just go baby face versus heel. Let it play itself out and see what the fans say.
All right. The next one is the match for the vacant AWA Women's Championship. Two of your guys' favorites. I know, especially two of your favorites, Mick, Medusa Michelli versus Sherry Martell.
Well, they did wrestle each other. And I talked before, Sherry was kind of the veteran and led Deuce through that match. But, in the history of the AWA, women's wrestling was such a unique commodity that if there was an extended program or the spotlight was on a lady for any extended amount of time, it was a rarity, and it didn't happen really until the 1980s. So in that sense, they were trendsetters. Logical matchup, Medusa and Sherry Martell.
Yep. And I was fortunate enough to see that matchup on more than one occasion. And you're right, Mick. Sherry carried Medusa back in those days. And I think Deuce would admit that. She was new into the business, but I'll give her credit. Fast forward many years, and she did prove that she belonged in the upper echelon of professional wrestling history for women.
Got it.
Let's go to the next one, the Brass Knuckles Last Man Standing match. Jerry the King Lawler against Nick Bockwinkle.
This was so good. I mean, when I looked at that one, and it played off of an angle that Nick and Jerry Lawler were having in Memphis. There was an infamous match and one of Nick's greatest promos ever, where it was you lose $500 every time you throw a punch in the match. It was kind of a blow-off situation. And Nick was complaining about Lawler using the fist, and Jerry Lawler, you can't win without resorting to that. So every time somebody throws a punch, there's Jerry with the AWA Heavyweight Championship belt. Anytime anybody throws a punch, it costs you $500. That was that match. But this one, the Last Man Standing, I love this. Jerry Lawler and Nick Bockwinkle, two of the greatest that ever lived.
I'll give you that, but I'm not as high on this match for this simple reason. When I hear the Brass Knucks, I'm thinking of Wahoo. I'm thinking of a Brody. I'm thinking of an Abdullah. I'm thinking of a bloodbath. And there's no doubt Lawler and Nick would both have given us a close-up version of watching an R-rated version of ER or something. But these two, they're professional. They were wrestlers. I would,
yeah. Something into more of a brawling, not necessarily like the wrestling angle of it.
Exactly. And when I see those two names and witness the number of matches that I have of the two of them, I think of wrestling. I don't think of a Brass Knucks situation. I will have to comment about the Scott Ledoux, the AWA enforcer. I like it. You gotta have somebody to keep law and order in the Brass Knuckles wrestling. Oh, never mind.
There we go.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that because I did not put the Scott Ledoux as your special guest referee, and I mean nobody's going to be more of a badass than Scott Ledoux was when it comes to being that. Here's one that I think would have been really fun to see. A 16-minute Iron Man match, the tag team of the High Flyers versus the Midnight Rockers.
Izzy, you came up with a dandy there. Can you just imagine? And again, this is both teams at the highlight of their career. So arguably the Rockers is 1980s, probably the High Flyers more the 1970s. But what a matchup! I'm thinking back to babyface versus babyface tag team match here at the Twin Cities, where the High Flyers wrestled Tito Santana and Rick Martell, and it was a blockbuster. I can only imagine the Rockers in their prime against the High Flyers in their prime. Interesting scenario with the 60-minute Iron Man match in a tag team situation.
And both teams could have gone the 60
Yeah.
minutes.
Exactly.
That's a key. Just because you can doesn't mean that you should. In this instance, these two teams could have carried that 1 hour Broadway. Fantastic matchup, despite what I said on the previous one. And I didn't hate the matchup, just the brass knuckles part. This one, I really loved. That would have been a very, very entertaining match. And all four of them know how to sell.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because we had the 6-man heel versus heel. Here we had babyface versus babyface, which again, I think when you're talking about it, we didn't see, back in the day, to my understanding, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, there wasn't many of the, bad guy versus bad guy, villain versus villain, hero versus hero angle. There was always a protagonist and an antagonist.
Yeah, for the most part, you're absolutely right. Every once in a while, they throw something in, Vern Gagne against Billy Robinson or something like that. But yeah, you're right. It was good versus evil was the predominant situation.
Mm-hmm.
Great, Izzy. What great matches.
Yeah. Why would you change the formula that's literally worked for decades? Yeah. You got it. It's good versus evil.
That's right.
All right, so congratulations to Izzy. Why don't you send Mick Karch your contact information, and we'll get that all taken care of. The second one here is from Mike Rosen, and I apologize if I'm not looking into the camera because I'm looking at the sheet. This is from Mike Rosen. One fall to a finish. This one fascinates me, guys. Right off the bat, Hulk Hogan versus Bruiser Brody, King Kong Brody.
Wow. And again, if we're saying both wrestlers in their prime, you got Hogan at the peak of his popularity when Hulkamania was running wild, and then you got Bruiser Brody, the Rebel. That would have been at the very least an interesting match. Interesting in the sense that, and I don't know what your feeling is, Joe, would Brody, and there's the Hulkster, would Brody have cooperated against Hulk Hogan? Clearly, it would have been a big money match. Maybe he would have, because Hogan was kind of a light touch. I don't think Hogan hurt anybody in the business, so it might not have come off as badly as it could.
Well, what was the before you get in there, Joe? What was the biggest concern with Brody not wanting to cooperate? Was there a certain individual, a certain personality? I mean, how would you know that Brody wouldn't cooperate?
A lot of times you didn't know. A lot of times he would cooperate until about the 19-minute mark of a 20-minute match. And, as he did against Jerry Blackwell, he did not like a finish here, and he walked out. Brody was his own man. And, if he felt he wasn't getting screwed over, if he felt he was going to look good and the match made sense, then I don't think he had any problem. But if he didn't agree with the booking philosophy, he would let you know sooner or later. And unfortunately, there were more than one laters in his matches.
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, but I have to say, all these years later, I understand what Brody was doing. Yeah. And he was protecting Bruiser Brody.
Yes.
He was a vagabond. He wrestled in different territories, and before the internet and before cable, you couldn't really tell or see what was going on. However, with the wrestling magazines and everything else, Frank Brody, King Kong, Frank Goodish, sorry. King Kong Brody was looking out for himself. So I can't blame him for that. In the instance of a match against Hogan, interesting is the best and safest way that I can explain it. Hulk Hogan, in my opinion, deserves credit for arguably being the biggest star, biggest attraction, made the most money in professional wrestling. With all due respect, Hogan, the wrestling abilities, he was not a Nick Bockwinkle. I will put it that way. And again, I mean no disrespect to Hogan, but in regards to this match, you'd have two just big guys. Hogan wasn't a brawler. Would Hogan have given to Brody? And how much would he have given?
Or would Brody have just taken, though, at that point?
You know what's interesting? And I was just thinking about this. I saw a match in Des Moines, Iowa, Brody and Andre the Giant. Now, you would think that it could be a little bit sloppy. Andre not being the high flyer, whatever. But it was surprisingly good. And Brody sold a lot for Andre. And I'm thinking if Brody was cooperative with Hogan, that would be a hell of a match. Certainly in their heyday, Hogan wouldn't have put him over. My guess is that, you have some kind of total chaos or Brody, does the job for Hogan. But on paper, love the idea.
Let me, the whole Hogan, Brody and Andre Brody scenario that you just said, Mick, I wonder if Brody gave Andre the respect because of how long Andre was. I mean, Andre is an icon. He is a legend in professional. He's a legend, period. And maybe I'm looking too much, Brody, going back into the early 80s, when that's what I'm picturing this match. Hogan was just starting. Hogan didn't have the pedigree. He didn't have the paperwork that Andre had. So did Brody do that for Andre? Or what Brody did for Andre, would he have done that for Hogan? I'm going to say no.
Okay. And just for, era's sake, it was 1978 that I saw that Brody and Andre match. So Andre had effectively been in the business for about 8 years. So, they were kind of parallel. But again, great match. Love the main event. So thank you, Mike, for that idea.
Yeah, let's go with the ladies' title here. Vivian Vachon, and we've heard this name before, and she's going to be mentioned again. Sherry Martell.
That, to me, would be a dream ladies match. Sherry was as tough as nails, but, man, you didn't mess around with Vivian Vachon. And when Vivian came into the AWA territory, she immediately stood out, not only because she was a Vachon, but just because of her personality and her style. It would have been one hell of a match. And, for me, that is a dream ladies match. Good call, Mike.
Well, you've got Sherry Martell, who was called Scary Sherry. You've got Vivian Vachon, just the last name Vachon. And all of a sudden, I want to go grab a dog biscuit and go and hide. The two of them, oh, God, that would have been a fantastic matchup. Let's get a video game going. I want to see these two, even in a video game. That'd be a blast.
Absolutely.
I mean, it seems like it would just be a really intense fight, not just a match, but just a fight between two women that you feel could legitimately tear each other apart.
Chris, it's like when Sherry and Luna Vachon had their feud in WWF.
Yes,
back in the day. So it's really a similar kind of a situation. wouldn't have been anything pretty about it outside of, Sherry and Vivian themselves. But you're right. One hell of a match. Very believable. No doubt. No doubt.
And Sherry and Vashon, like you said.
Yep.
Sherry and Vashon. Let's go to the next one, a tag team death match. Crusher and Bruiser versus Ray Stevens and Pat Patterson.
Fantastic. And again, you have to pigeonhole it to when they were in their prime. You don't want to talk about the Crusher and the Bruiser of the later years, or even Stevens and Patterson for that matter. But you talk about Stevens and Patterson, two of the greatest workers that ever lived. Crusher and Bruiser, they did what they did. They were brawlers. They were kick, stop, nothing fancy, nothing finesse. Ray and Pat, can you just imagine them selling for the Crusher and Dick the Bruiser? I mean, Nick and Ray did it. Bockwinkle and Stevens sold for Crusher and Bruiser continuously. But that match, to me, is a marquee, all-time great matchup.
So, Mick, I got to ask you, this match, the names go back more towards your era than it does mine. This is a late 60s, early 70s. And even though I was alive, the memories aren't quite there when I'm 5, 6, 7 years old. Did these four face off against each other? I got to believe that they booked them at some point.
Without having the Google info right in front of me, I would assume that they probably did. Or there had to be a mix and match. Somehow their paths had to cross. I mean, we know that for a fact, especially again with Ray Stevens and Crusher and Bruiser. That was a continuum. But again, in their prime, what a match. That, the old cliche that could headline any arena in the world, that one could have. Absolutely.
No doubt. No doubt. All these years later, I'd still buy a ticket to go and watch that.
Yeah. All right, let's go to our the next one is a lumberjack match. Nick Bockwinkle and Bobby Heenan versus Johnny Valentine and Killer Kowalski.
Wow. And that, I was really intrigued by that one because, Mr. Old Fart here, Johnny Valentine and Killer Kowalski were two of the all-time greatest wrestlers that ever lived. And, that combination, that mix and match, and really, again, if you're talking about when the guys are in their prime, two different eras a little bit, not a lot of time between them. But again, my God, that would have been just phenomenal. And there's Bobby with the Blackjacks. And, Jack and Mulligan were big guys, but all of a sudden Bobby Heenan looks like Skylo Low with a wig in that picture. So I'm not sure if Bobby was on his knees on a bar stool. But nonetheless, what a fantastic matchup. And wrestling fans who are not familiar with Killer Kowalski or Johnny Valentine, Killer Kowalski, by the time he arrived in the AWA, he was kind of past his prime, but a great heel back in the day. Johnny Valentine, they didn't make him any tougher, and Johnny's got one of the great quotes of all time. You may not believe that wrestling is real, but, you watch me and you're going to believe I'm real. And so that would have been fantastic.
The thing that intrigues me about that match is think of the promos that could have been leading up to that. I mean, Heenan and Bockwinkle, I think most of our audience knows. Luscious Johnny, well, I'm thinking Johnny Valentine, but Valentine and Kowalski, they could talk on the mic as well. They were no slouches. I'll give it to Bock and Heenan. I mean, it's tough to go against the all-time greatest all around in Bobby Heenan, but man, those promos. Well, let me throw something out there. Who do we put in doing the promos? Marty O'Neill or Mean Gene Okerlund?
I would say back in the era, you give it to Marty O'Neill.
Yeah,
because,
I would say Marty for that.
Yeah, because this is not a promo that you want to get silly. And Gene would mug for the camera and what have you. And Marty O'Neill would give one line, hand the wrestler the microphone and let him go. So I would go with Marty O'Neill. But I tell you what, talk about old school greatness. what a match that would be.
Agreed.
Yep. And apologize, I hit the wrong one. I hit the Blackjack when I meant to hit Bockwinkle. All right, and the last one from Mike Rosen, the 6-man tag team cage match. Vern Gagne, Greg Gagne, and Jim Brunzell versus Kurt Hennig, Larry Hennig, and Harley Race.
Oh, God.
Talk about a contrast of styles. Like,
well, not only that, I'm salivating over that match. I mean, I really would buy a ticket and, again, put everybody in their prime. That's what you have to do. You can't think of Vern, in 1981 when he retired for the first time. What a fantastic match that would be. And, I don't know how the finish, the booking, I have a pretty good idea of who would come out on top. But, boy, you get that family feud in there, the Flyers and Vern, and toss Harley Race into the mix, one of the toughest guys that ever lived. And, of course, he and Larry Hennig were AWA tag team champions back in the 60s. Tremendous, tremendous match. Great call, Mike. Great call.
Mick, I think you said it all. A phenomenal matchup. Mike Rosen, that's all I can just do. Mick, you've said it all. Those 6 names. Oh man, would that have been fun?
Love it. Love it.
Damn.
So,
All right. Oh, and look at that. Look at that. There's Larry and my God, Kurt. Look at him there. I think he was Mr. OK at the time. Mr. Perfect. The Gagne Hennig feud in the background, Larry and Vern, that by itself, just to know that every time they locked up, there was real heat, and Vern's liver spots were popping off. And, there was some real animosity there. So great 6-man. I love it. Love the idea.
all right, and our last one comes from Jim Pouquet, and we're going to kick it off with a match we saw later on. But again, we're going to get it first in the AWA. One of the men that we just saw, Kurt Hennig, versus Minneapolis's own, maybe not necessarily known for AWA, more of a Crockett and NWA guy, the Nature Boy Ric Flair.
Wow. Well, again, the prime of Ric Flair was certainly not in the AWA. He made his fortune in the NWA and then, of course, on to WWE. But nonetheless, the matchup, if you put these two, arguably two of the greatest wrestlers of their respective eras. And, we saw it, as you alluded to, Chris, we saw the situation, we saw the feuds later on, but in their prime, can you just imagine Kurt bumping all over the ring, head over tail for about 45 minutes. And Flair, of course, will do the face plant and, get lost off the top rope. And that's his arsenal. But I think the match itself, again, two of the greatest, and you can't go wrong putting that in the main event.
First thing that popped to mind to me would be to make this a 2-hour time limit, and that both of these guys could have made it for that 2 hours. They'd have been blowing up severely. But you said it, two of the all-time greats. I will say, and I've said this to people. In fact, Brian Knobs, last time I was down in Florida, at his place, and he had a buddy of his come over, and he said, "Joe, tell him about Kurt." And I just said, and this would have been, 2001 when this happened. But I'm going back to the end of the AWA run for Kurt and when he was with the WWF as Mr. Perfect. He was as good as it got in the industry. He was Mr. Perfect. He truly was. And his ability to work in the ring, second to none in his prime. So put him against Ric Flair. Oh my God, that would have been a phenomenal 2-hour match.
I always take the unpopular opinion. I think Kurt Hennig, as opposed to Ric Flair, I'll go with Kurt every day of the week.
I agree.
And because, Kurt was similar to Nick Bockwinkle in the sense that he never had the same match twice. Flair, you kind of knew, this is, point A, point B, where's this bump coming up and over the top turnbuckle. But just, a great matchup again. And good call, Jim.
Yeah.
I'd give it to Flair on the promo.
Yeah.
Work inside the ring, Kurt Hennig.
Not even close.
And I will say my one problem with the Mr. Perfect gimmick, and this is when I was a kid, Mr. Perfect never lost. Once he lost, I felt, well, he can't be perfect anymore. I'm like, you got to change the name. And they didn't change the name from Mr. Perfect. I'm like, but he lost. You can't, perfect people don't lose.
But you know what? Here was what I would say to that, Chris. He's a wrestling heel. So even though he got beat, it never happened. I mean, in his mind, or he got screwed over somehow. Ronda Rousey, the baddest woman on the planet, got knocked on her ass, in first round, 2 matches in a row, but she's still the baddest woman. But yeah, I mean, the heels always had an excuse. Yeah. So, he's always Mr. Perfect, period.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's another good one, a 6-man tag team match in a cage. Brody, Hanson, and Abdullah the Butcher. Oh my God. You got one tough side. How about you equal that with the masked superstar, Ernie Ladd, and maybe the man who can, maybe he's as tough or tougher than anybody on the other side? Haku.
That match.
Somebody's going to die.
Somebody's going to die.
It's a literal death match.
Probably a ringsider. But that matchup, of all the entries that I received, that is the one that jumped out at me. And you are absolutely right, Chris. Can you just imagine? Can it get any tougher than those guys? I would say, believe it or not, has it come to this, the odd man out is that guy right there. Abdullah the Butcher. Abdullah had a great gimmick, but compared to Brody and Hanson in terms of legitimate toughness, I don't know about that. And on the other side of the thing, oh my God, can you imagine having those guys on your side in a bar fight? Just extraordinary. To me, the match of all the submissions that I got. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. There he is.
The first thing that popped to my mind when I saw the 6-man tag match, if I was the booker, if I was the promoter for it, my first call would have been to get a sponsorship from the American Red Cross for blood donation.
That's a good one, yeah.
That match, the crimson red, I don't care what color that ring mat cover was going to be, it was going to be red by the end of it.
And, and don't discount Bill Eadie, Mass Superstar, in terms of toughness. No. Big, strong, rough, tough guy, no question about it. Not only would you call the American Red Cross, Joe, but I think Gillette probably would have had their biggest month ever right after that. And Ernie Ladd. Ernie, to me, in the history of wrestling, one of the greatest talkers, one of the greatest heels of all time. You want to see how to do a heel promo, watch Ernie Ladd in his heyday.
The Big Cat.
Yeah, Big Cat.
I feel like he's one of those guys that maybe gets overlooked a bit when it comes to some of the greatness and some of those heel promos like you were talking about, Mick.
Yes, sir. All right.
All right, let's get to the next one. We've seen this one. This was also one of our earlier submissions. Ladies match, Vivian Vachon versus Sherry Martell.
Again, we talked about that. 2 no-nonsense ladies. I would take it to the modern day with Jamie Hayter and Hikaru Shida in terms of going back and forth and beating the living shit out of each other. Nothing fancy, nothing, no pillow fight here, no lingerie battle royal or anything else. This would have been one hell of a match.
Okay, let me go a slightly different angle on this one. Mick, if you were the booker, who would you have go over?
Oh, boy. I think
this is for the championship.
it's a matter of the era. Vivian is 1970s. Sherry,
we're going by in their prime.
Yeah, in their prime. I think Sherry Martell.
I agree.
Oh, okay. I was not expecting that. I really thought, as I was kind of like formulating, I really thought that you would have gone with Vivian, Mick.
That was a tough call, and you know what? Check with me later today, and I might have a different answer for you.
All right. How about this brass knuckles match? Last man standing, Blackjack Mulligan versus Big John Studd.
Wow. A lot of beef in that ring. Blackjack Mulligan in his day was one hell of a worker. And, and that family lineage has certainly, continued. Big John Studd, very limited in what he could do in the ring. Clearly got by with size alone and the hard punch. It would have to be a brass knucks match. There's nothing else that you could do with that one.
Say that's how you're bringing John Studd down, is with brass knucks.
There you go. Absolutely. I mean, what are you going to do? Put the guys in a Hurricane Rana match? Ain't going to happen. But again, for a brass knucks match, those two big guys, and I would assume that Mulligan would have gone over in that one, but that would have been a hell of a match. I have never been a big fan of the big man versus big man brawling kind of match. They can tend to get boring. In this case, maybe Mulligan, there's Jack. There he is right there, old Big Bob Windham. Maybe he could have carried Studd to a good match.
Well, if Studd would have gotten those brass knucks and delivered the hard punch with the brass knucks, well, now we're talking about some damage, because I remember seeing Studd against Mad Dog Vachon in the Minneapolis Auditorium. Talk about a size difference, and I know, Mad Dog doesn't equate into this, but that hard punch on the little dog compared to Studd, Mad Dog Vachon, was devastating. Throw some knucks on it. I don't care how big you are, Blackjack Mulligan. I'm afraid that could have skipped a beat or two and given Studd the 1, 2, 3.
And that's a great point, Joe, that you put that along with the finish. It just adds another layer to it. And that's also that can kind of help build into that long-term storytelling. Finally, the Iron Man match, Harley Race. It's the first time that we've heard this name, guys, and I'm kind of a little surprised. Harley Race versus Billy Robinson.
In their prime, my God. From a technical standpoint, Billy Robinson is always the name that comes to mind when you think of the holds, counter holds, and et cetera. And then I'm thinking of the Billy Robinson Bockwinkle matches that were just sensational. Harley Race was not a finesse guy. Harley Race was a straight ahead, no nonsense, punch, kick, but could wrestle guy, could bump his ass all over the place. And I'm guessing if a title is not at stake, Billy Robinson goes over in that one. If it would have been for the NWA title with Harley on top, or whatever AWA title, then I would give it to Harley. But two of the all-time greats. Again, you're right. Where is the name Billy Robinson in these fantasy matches? Yeah,
but sad that it's only one of the, well, at least from the three that were chosen, that Billy only showed up the one time. But in regards to this match, I look at wrestlers in three categories. You've got sports entertainers, you've got wrestlers, and you've got grapplers. I'll put Harley Race as a grappler, somebody that grew up in the 50s and 60s as his prime, when wrestling was still that. Coming off the top rope was a huge deal. Okay. Billy Robinson, to me, was more of a wrestler, maybe different era. He had more showmanship because of his ability to counter and put moves on that not many people would see. And he did it with such finesse. It was great. So 2 different styles. As much of a fan as I was of Billy Robinson, I mean, damn, Harley Race legend is an understatement for him. And by all accounts, next to Haku, or quite possibly side by side with Haku, you didn't want Harley Race on the other side of a bar fight.
No. And you know what's interesting, Joe? You can almost picture that match in your mind. I mean, you can picture the moveset of both guys.
Yeah.
You picture how the match would play itself out, almost move for move. Can you imagine a street fight, a shoot fight between Billy Robinson and Harley Race? And again, I would go with you. I would say Harley would be the guy there, unless Billy could tie him up and take him down to the pavement. But 2 of the greatest of all time. And just as an aside, guys, in all the entries that I got, there was not a lot of Billy Robinson mentions, not just in the winners. And that surprises me in the history of the AWA.
The last thing that I'll say about this match, and it's what I have said on this show, and I've said to locker rooms when I've talked to them in the past, this match would make me believe.
Yes. Oh,
yeah. Absolutely.
These 2 in an Iron Man match, I'd be done with that, and I'd be like, oh my God, wrestling is real. That's how good both of these guys were in the ring.
Yeah, and Harley Race was going 60 minutes with guys every night.
Yeah.
You know, and Harley didn't look like a streamlined athlete, but he had he smoked like a fish, one after another. Harley was a chain smoker, and he could go in and do 60, 90 minutes without, losing his breath. So great matchup. Great matchup.
Yeah. And to kind of, go back to what you were saying, Mick, with all of the submissions, nothing wrong with the submissions that we got. I mean, I think there were a lot of really good cards, like, because there were ones that excuse me, that I saw that I was like, I mean, we had some disagreements with these. There were some matches where I'm like, I would love to see this, but in terms of like all of the cards and everything, these were the 3 that really stood out. But there were, I cannot stress enough, there were some really, really good submissions that did not even get mentioned today. So it was incredible, and it really is fun to see what people in their minds would consider to be a dream match.
Great points, Chris. And again, as I said earlier on, this is subjective. There's no right or wrong.
No right or wrong. No.
If you thought that this match was going to be tremendous, who am I to tell you that it wouldn't have been? And vice versa. And next week, they're going to get a chance to do exactly that and tell us if they think we are full of shit in some of our, matches.
We already know that. I mean, come on.
Well, yeah. And again, we're counting on my email not crashing when it comes time to critique, our matches. It could happen, in which case, well, that's life in the big city.
What's your backup? Small Dick Energy at getalife.com.
What?
Somebody's on social media.
Oh my God!
You know where I got that, Joe?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Good. So what I'm saying is, if Joe Ciupik, who apparently is now the 3rd nasty guy, we got that little bit of information today. If Joe Ciupik wants to come up with a match, with the tag team of Harry Paratestes and Mick Karch, that's fine. Let him do that. This is, again, subjective, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh,
I love it.
Wrestling, it has to be subjective.
Yeah. All right, let's get some shout outs here, guys, and then let's go ahead and bring it home.
Let's get Joe's shout out first.
My shout out this week is to a long time, and I'll steal a line from Sid Hartman, close personal friend, Mr. Al DeRusha, former ring announcer, former booker, former do-it-all guy for the AWA, an inductee into the Minnesota Broadcasting Hall of Fame. Al is in his late 80s, and like you can expect or suspect, late 80s. His health isn't the greatest, but I wanted to give a shout out to my dear friend, Mr. Al Captain Kangaroo DeRusha.
Anybody that can tell a waitress at the Showboat Cafe in Las Vegas to please go get the Parmesan gimmick, all right by me. So, again, Al DeRusha, legendary. My shout out is to Jason Whalen. I mean, I met the guy for the first time at the AWA reunion. He is a great wrestling fan, loyal to a fault to our podcast and to the AWA Unleashed fan page. Jason, we appreciate you more than we can tell you. Thank you for the support.
And I am going to go to Joe Samples at Front Row Joe FRJ on Twitter. He said that he just found us a few days ago and he loves the podcast. So hopefully he's catching up on everything and he will see himself in this episode. So thank you, Joe. And thank you guys to everybody for making it a great 2022. And hopefully we're off to a good start here in 2023. And next week, yeah, you get to judge our dream cards because Mick and Joe are going to submit theirs. I'm going to submit mine and we'll have some fun. So that being said, we still got some great guests coming up. We got a lot of good stuff. Visit our sponsors, Sotastick, co.com, 7th Avenue Pizza.com. And for our winners, get in contact with Mick, get your contact info to him, and then we will make sure that we hook you up with those gift cards. So that being said, guys, this was fun. This was, I think, a pretty good way to kick off 2023.
Absolutely.
We're done already? Damn.
That's pretty much it. See ya.
Okay, bye.